Bhavan for the delay between 2010 and now 2024?
Well, Gaurav, we don't have any clarity on exactly why it's taken so long to grant the sanction, but we are given to understand that usually this entire process takes a little bit of time. But 14 years is too much of a time for the sanction to be granted, so we don't have any clarity on that. But as regarding the offences that she's been charged with, so earlier she was charged with promoting enmity between groups, with public mischief, for also provocative statements that were made during the event. And keeping in line those offences is why the sanction has been granted even under the UAPA. So we're given to understand that even under the UAPA, the sanction has been granted for her to promote public mischief. That is the reason why the sanction under UAPA has been granted. But the essential crux of the matter is that the statements made by Arundhati Roy during the event essentially led to enmity between different groups in India. When she came out and claimed that Kashmir was not an integral part of India, it could lead to some tension between different groups, particularly in Kashmir, which is why prosecution was initiated against her even under the Indian Penal Code and the Criminal Procedure Code. But now taking in line the stringent steps that the Delhi police has taken, because Delhi police was pushing for these sanctions to be granted, but now they finally have been granted. It remains to be seen whether or not the Delhi police is going to move further and officially arrest her in this 14-year-old case or not, or whether she will only be allowed to face trial in the case without facing any arrest.
Stay with me, Nalini, on the legal aspect of this case. I also want to bring into this conversation Ambassador Rajiv Dogra. He's served in Pakistan, was also India's ambassador to Italy. Also joining us is Ambassador Veena Sikri on this special broadcast. And Ambassador Dogra, if I could bring you in. Of course, on the 5th of August 2019, when Article 370 was used to defang Article 370 or abrogate, if I may, Article 370, this becomes completely infructuous. But for an author of repute and an activist to say Kashmir is not an integral part of India. Sir, how do you read this? Because this clearly would be music to the ears of those who are hostile to India, who incidentally bled India in 2010 and continue to bleed India in 2024.
Well, I don't know much about legal issues, nor do I want to comment on domestic issues. But all I can say is that if we go by two parliamentary resolutions on Jammu and Kashmir, and by Jammu and Kashmir, I mean including the parts occupied by Pakistan and China, the parliamentary resolutions are very clear that the entire area of Jammu and Kashmir, including those two parts, or three parts really, belong to India. So, as far as Parliament is concerned, as far as Indian Constitution is concerned, because that also gives out Indian territory in its entirety, the position is very clear that entire Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India, full stop.
Oh, absolutely. And for the benefit of our viewers, 2010 was quite a difficult time in Jammu and Kashmir. I was in Srinagar. There was intense stone pelting that, according to Omar Abdullah, who was then Chief Minister of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir, had indicated people like Masarrat Alam, they were accused of taking money from Pakistan, fueling tension in Jammu and Kashmir, bleeding Kashmir. More than 100 people had been killed during that intense stone pelting and action that was undertaken by security forces. Ambassador Veena Sikri, Kashmir's been through a lot, but when people within our country and people of repute who may be authors and activists say Kashmir is not an integral part of India, this clearly would be music to Pakistan's ears, and many in Pakistan have actually quoted the activist and the author, ma'am.
Yes, actually, that is a very important point, because actually such people who say that Kashmir is not a part of India, they give no reason for it. they have nothing to bolster their case for saying that Jammu and Kashmir is not a part of India. We do know that historically, the entire area of Jammu and Kashmir is historically a very important source of India's civilizational values, of India's own heritage, of India's, the Martan temple there, the Sharda Peeth there. So these are events and places and institutions belonging to antiquity, far predating the present history of Jammu and Kashmir. So there is absolutely no grounds or no basis, neither is any provided when such people make statements about Jammu and Kashmir not being part of India. And one can understand maybe some, disillusioned people abroad saying this, but when we find people within our own country saying it, it is extremely worrisome, extremely disturbing, and certainly it has an impact on young people when they hear authors who claim to be famous for other reasons saying this. So I think that the question of trying Ms. Arundhati Roy under the UAPA is certainly a good decision that has been taken, because it is an integral part of India. You're talking about India's sovereignty. You're talking about India's territorial integrity. So when you're going to question these very basic elements of a nation's identity, which is the sovereignty and territorial integrity of that country, then certainly it is a very disturbing matter which needs to be tried under the highest law of the land.
I'm glad you've said that, ma'am. Ground position must be stated, and as you very rightly point out, and Ambassador Rajiv Dogra, before we take our viewers to Italy and get them the latest from Italy, the fact remains Kashmir is the land of Rishi Kashyap. Ambassador Veena Sikri pointed out it's been the land of learning. It's the land of Sharda Peeth. It's the land of Martanda Surya Temple. It's something that perhaps a part of history hasn't been taught to our own people, and especially those who may harp on Kashmir being a minority, a Muslim majority part of our country. It has a history that actually predates all that. Way before Pakistan ever came into existence, Pakistan is an illegal occupation of a part of Jammu and Kashmir, including northern areas, and China of the Sakshkam Valley and the Aksai region, sir. So perhaps in our own country, these facts must be known to all, Ambassador Dogra, and you've written about it.
Well, absolutely. My first book, Where Borders Bleed, was exactly about it. And the point I made there in very brief terms is that Kashmir is not the issue. Kashmir, from the term itself, as you said very rightly, originates from Rishi Kashyap. And the Hindu population of Kashmir was a fact of life in its entirety till about 400 years back. Then, of course, the invasion started and there were some dissipations. But the larger point is that it is not Kashmir which an Indian national should examine and dissect. The issue is the historical amputation of India, which should be gone into and objected to, because there was no legal basis, there was no historical basis, there was no social basis, nor political basis for the partition of India. So the issue should not be Kashmir, but the question should be, why was India amputated by a foreign colonial power?
Oh, absolutely. And why would some within our own country peddle the agenda of countries that are hostile to India? But let's see how this case proceeds. We'll be tracking this very, very closely. I now want to shift focus to our top story. Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, welcomed Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He's in Italy to be a part of the G7 summit outreach. The two met with the traditional Indian greeting, a civilizational greeting, Namaste. Prime Minister Narendra Modi held a series of bilateral meetings on the sidelines of G7 with several world leaders, including Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak. Geeta Mohan is on ground zero in Apulia in Italy. She sent us this report.
On his first foreign tour after returning as the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi is attending the G7 summit in Italy. Though India is not a member of the group of countries with advanced economies, it's a special invitee. The summit, set against the backdrop of pressing global issues, witnessed a series of high-profile bilateral meetings on its opening day. The bonhomie between Prime Minister Modi and French President Emmanuel Macron was on display as both the leaders held a bilateral meet on the sidelines of G7 summit. Prime Minister also held key bilateral meet with United Kingdom Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The two leaders discussed India-UK comprehensive strategic partnership. In his talks with Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, which is fighting Russian invasion, Prime Minister Modi reiterated that the only way to peace is through dialogue. The two leaders were seen sharing a hug ahead of the talks. Prime Minister Modi's interactions underscore the strengthening ties between India and global powers. Modi also met Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, greeting her with a warm namaste and recreating the much-anticipated melody movement that fans had been eagerly waiting for. The day was marked by a heartwarming moment when Prime Minister Modi was seen greeting and hugging Pope Francis. With Prime Minister Modi's active engagements and the country's growing global influence, India's role on the world stage is undeniably expanding. Bureau Report, India Today.
And Prime Minister Narendra Modi has just spoken at the outreach session. He spoke on artificial intelligence, he spoke on energy, Africa and the Mediterranean. The Prime Minister has just put out a message on social media platform X saying, highlighted a wide range of subjects, notably the wide-scale usage of technology for human progress. The rise of technology in various aspects of human life has also reaffirmed the importance of cyber security. Spoke about how India is leveraging artificial intelligence for India's development journey. It is important that AI remains transparent, secure, accessible and responsible. I quickly want to cut across to India Today's Foreign Affairs editor Geeta Mohan, joining us with more on this. Geeta, the Prime Minister at this outreach emphasized on the use of technology for the betterment of humankind. He also emphasized on his re-election, the largest election in the world, and he's been re-elected for the third time as the leader of the National Democratic Alliance. Give us details, Geeta.
Well, in fact, he began with that. He began with the fact that he comes with a third term mandate. And that's really important because that's emphasizing that this is a country that is showing stability, is showing continuum, and that the world leaders can interact and engage India with a sense of purpose, knowing that there is clarity in where India is headed. Also, the fact that most of the G7 leaders and G7 countries could see a massive shift, whether it's from party to party or from leadership to leadership, even if it's the same party. So we'll have to wait and see how that really pans out. Yes, but Prime Minister Narendra Modi as a guest nation was a part of the outreach session. The optics are important, Gaurav. It's not just the content, the substance. We'll come to that, but look at the optics. Look at the kind of warm welcome from Prime Minister Meloni. Later, there is going to be a bilateral. And we do know that there'll be micro moments that the world is going to capture, particularly social media in India and some sections in Italy. But his meeting with Pope Francis, the two leaders who actually opened the session. Pope Francis opened the session speaking on AI, and the hug between Pope Francis and Prime Minister Narendra Modi clearly shows the warmth with which leaders across the world welcome India and the Indian leadership. Having said that, the fact that in his outreach session he focused on Africa, an entire continent that India focused on, and ensured that AU becomes a member of the G20, reiterating the importance of Africa, reiterating the importance of a digital world, of AI, where India has already played a very important role. And why do I say that is because we saw appreciation in that very session come in from the French President Macron, lauded India's efforts in the AI and digital sector. President Biden spoke of India as a critical partner in the in the critical minerals partnership. And so there was a lot of appreciation for India and India's role in the world. So that is one part, but it's the bilateral part that's also very important,
Okay.
because when we talk about bilateral, we're talking about strategic defense and also about how India plays a very important role as peacemaker. When he met with President Zelensky, knowing very well, the world knows and Zelensky knows that India and Russia share very close relations. So this is an outreach from none other than the president of Ukraine himself.
Geeta,
and let's
stay
see
with
where
us.
that really takes.
Absolutely. Stay with us and we'll carry this conversation forward. You get us all the latest inputs from Apulia, and it's a beautiful, Italy in the backdrop that we see, and keep showing us those lovely images behind you. But let me once again bring in Ambassador Rajiv Dogra, a former ambassador to Italy. And Ambassador, the Prime Minister, he began his outreach address by talking about returning to power for the third time. How significant is the statement of Prime Minister Narendra Modi when he's on world stage and talking about democracy? He's called India the mother of democracy. In a democratic election, he's been re-elected for the third time, the National Democratic Alliance, sir.
Very interestingly put, Gaurav. Now, one has to contrast Mr. Modi's position with those of the other participants of actual G7. Most of them have either faced a defeat in the European parliamentary election last week, or are going to face defeat, as is speculated about Mr. Sunak in the parliamentary elections in UK, and about the
President
French
Biden
Prime
facing an
Minister
uphill.
Macron,
Yes, sir.
in the National Assembly elections. So you have a contrast between one who's just got another mandate in the parliamentary elections in India, and others whom the popular vote or popular opinion polls seem to be rejecting in terms of their leadership. And you can see it in the body language. Mr. Modi was confident when he met people. Others were hesitant, including Zelensky. Zelensky was hesitant when he met Mr. Modi, and Mr. Modi was the first to embrace him. The second thing, and more importantly, whether there is an election in their countries or not, the fact is that they do not, unlike in the past summits, have anything to offer in financial terms. They are
Yes.
themselves facing financial crisis, so they cannot be the giver of aid or giver of money, whether it is energy security, whether it is global warming, or any of the major issues facing this world. All they can do is dip into the money that they have grabbed from Russia and give it to Ukraine on an interest-free loan.
And that $50 billion is another bone of contention. We'll get Geeta also to respond to that. But Ambassador Sikri, I want to just quote what Prime Minister Narendra Modi said. Geeta Mohan has sent us this report. Prime Minister expressed that it was a matter of great satisfaction for him to be attending the summit after his re-election in the largest democratic exercise in the history of humankind. He expressed that for technology to be successful, it had to be underpinned by a human-centric approach. In this context, he shared India's success in leveraging digital technology for public service delivery. So the Prime Minister referring to his electoral victory at the G7 outreach. What's the message that India is sending out to the G7 countries, to the outreach countries, and the world at large, Ambassador?
Well, we must see his remark, and I think it was very appropriately, very well put by Prime Minister Modi. We must see his remark in the context of the barrage of unfair criticism which had been leveled against India in the months running up to the summit by all the leading newspapers of the world, whether it was the WAPO or the NYT or the Financial Times or the Guardian or any other paper in Canada, even in France, even in Germany. There was a barrage of almost an attack on India's democracy, saying, oh, it's not really a democracy and this and that. I think the election results, the way in which they were conducted over a period of 7 weeks, no violence at all, very marginal violence, and absolutely free and fair results. This acceptance by the world And we've seen in the days after the results have been declared that the world they have eaten their own words, as it were, and come out and accepted that indeed these elections were the freest and the fairest ever seen in the world.
Yep.
The electorate in India is more than the population of the entire European Union combined. And the number of people who voted, even they were, more than the population of most of the countries, with the exclusion of China. So it's a tremendous tribute to India's free and fair elections, to our democratic process, and the world has recognized it. That's number one. Number two, I think what he said on artificial intelligence is very important, because he called for a human-centric approach.
Yes.
And even Pope Francis, when he spoke on artificial intelligence and he led the debate on artificial intelligence, he also cast doubt on how artificial intelligence, unless it's very carefully controlled, can be misused and can mislead people. We already know that some of the largest companies in the world who have set up these AI programs, ChatGPT and so on, they're having to apologize because they know that those programs are misleading individuals,
Yes.
particularly younger people. And they can put wrong ideas in their minds. So I think this is a very important debate on artificial intelligence.
And this human-centric approach for the benefit of humankind, Geeta, the Prime Minister has emphasized it on this platform and on multiple platforms, the direct benefit transfer and how DBT is something that the world actually wants to emulate. You've reported on that even in the past. Bring us more details of what the Prime Minister said, Geeta.
Well, the fact that Prime Minister Narendra Modi focused on the areas that are of particular focus in the outreach session, which is data privacy, security, artificial intelligence, Africa, the Mediterranean, Indo-Pacific, and Africa. Very specific to AI and digital, the fact that other countries lauded India, particularly President Macron, goes to show that India takes this responsibility of artificial intelligence and the digital space very, very seriously. And security breaches, or for that matter, security of data, is something that's very, very important and very close to the administration's heart. We will have to wait and see how there's going to be cooperation on this, not just data security, but also the bigger picture of big data, data transfer, how they're looking at digitizing and how they're looking at protection of data of the citizens of the respective countries, even if there is cooperation. So on all those fronts, Prime Minister Narendra Modi did speak, emphasize on the importance of that. But on other fronts, in terms of security, in terms of strategic, Prime Minister Narendra Modi re-emphasized India's position, and also which really, Gaurav, highlights where India stands today in the G7 and across the world.
And is this actually showing how India's stature continues to grow globally? Ambassador Dogra, this is the 5th year in a row that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been to G7 as an invitee, the 11th time that India's been there. But I want to once again for a moment focus on energy security. India's approach is based on availability, accessibility, affordability and acceptability. The Prime Minister said, we are working to fulfill our COP commitments before the designated time period. India is working to usher in a green era based on the principles of Mission Life. The Prime Minister highlighted the campaign, Ek Ped Maa Ke Naam, to make our planet more sustainable. This is where Ambassador Dogra, he's also telling the world, as a developing country, India is doing all that we can, perhaps ahead of our goals and the targets, but the world needs to do more, Ambassador Dogra.
Well, exactly. I think it is good that energy security and energy supplies are being highlighted, because had it not been for India's insistence that we must continue to import oil from Russia, the Petroleum Ministry ensured that, the world at large would have suffered. The prices would have gone up. Europe, which has, through India, been importing a lot of Russian oil, would have suffered economically much more than it is suffering already. The other thing is that you pointed out very rightly that this is the 5th time Prime Minister has attended the G7 summit and 11th time that an Indian Prime Minister has attended G7 summit. Now, that by itself is an acknowledgement of the respect and also the regard that India has held in as a responsible power. And at this juncture, the world is passing through multiple crises, be it Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, or financially,
Yes.
unemployment. The fact that besides energy security, the world has also to think in terms of the food grain security because if things escalate in Ukraine, the food grain may not be available in the same quantity and in the same
Food,
numbers.
fuel, fertilizer, three things that India has repeated.
The entire thing. And that is why a responsible country like India, which not only provides for itself and
Yes.
secures essential things for itself, but also things for others and provides for them, including something which was very unheard of in earlier times to Europe and indirectly to America itself. That's why America is so quiet on this oil purchase from Russia. So,
Oh, absolutely.
India has a role which is grudgingly but increasingly being recognized by the Western world now.
Interesting you should say that, because Ambassador Sikri, the Prime Minister reiterated India's commitment to speak about the well-being of the global South, which is ironically a major sufferer because of this global uncertainty. I want to read out what the Prime Minister's office, the Minister of External Affairs, has just put out. India will continue to work closely with Africa, a glimpse of which was seen during last year's G20 summit when the African Union became a permanent member of the forum, and that too during India's presidency, unquote. But Ambassador Sikri, are the G7 countries doing enough when they have clean energy? Are they sharing it enough and quickly when it comes to technology with the developing world, whether it's Africa, India, or other countries that are developing, ma'am?
Yeah, I think sharing of technology is certainly a big issue for India and for the rest of the global South. And I think one of the very important opportunities that Prime Minister Modi's participation in this G7 has given him is to present the results of the G20 summit, which were held just about 7 or 8 months ago in India, and the entire year of meetings in India that yielded a lot of very positive directions and decisions and consensual decisions on a wide range of subjects, including food security, energy security, digital security, and so on. And all these, the Prime Minister is now presenting to G7 in the hope that the G7 and the G20 can work together. We do know that all these decisions that were done during the G20, India's chairmanship of the G20, had the Global South fully at the front of its attention. The African Union's admission as a member of the G20 is one example of this, but even so many other areas, the interests of the Global South were fully protected and projected.
Yes.
And this is now being done at the G7 level as well. So the discussions with the Prime Minister of Italy, with the entire G7, we know that President of Brazil is there and he's the current chairman of the G20.
Yes.
This gives a very valuable opportunity for India, Brazil, and other countries to work together to carry forward the interests of the Global South in the forum of the G7. And I think the coordination that should result from such a meeting as the G7, between G7 and G20, is very important for the future welfare of the world. We do know that very important decisions have been announced recently. For example, Saudi Arabia has gone back on the entire petrodollars agreement.
Yes.
What impact will this have on the world economy? It's a very vital opportunity to discuss it at this forum, because we do know that this agreement being, reverted after 40 years of actual agreement since 1974. 50 years of the agreement, and really more. 80 years after the Bretton Woods 1944 agreement. So it's really a very major thing, and we don't know yet what the impact on the world economy is going to be, the impact on the role of the dollar in the world economy is going to be.
And
so
if the Chinese currency will become stronger and the US currency becomes weaker, would be an aspect. But for a moment, I want to focus, Ambassador Dogra, on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's meeting with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. That warm hug, the conversation, both Prime Minister and President Zelensky tweeting about it, or putting out a post on X about it. What do you make of that? What would President Zelensky's expectations be from India?
Well, before I answer that, let me compliment Geeta Mohan on a nice studio she set up in Brindisi. Very nice backdrop. But coming to Zelensky, it's whether it is Zelensky's ego or Ukrainian national interest, which is paramount and which should be paramount, there's a lot of confusion in that. At times, it seems that Zelensky is driven by an agenda which is more personal than national. The second thing is the outside actors. Is America really interested that Russia should have the territories, the Russian territories,
Yes.
the 4 territories that President Putin has talked about, is mainly the Russian nationals who live there and have lived there for centuries.
Generations, yes.
So America is not interested that Russia should get away with that part of Ukraine, largely for the reason that it is mineral rich. Some people estimate that it is as much as $50 trillion of mineral wealth there.
Yes.
And some of the minerals are extremely important for the modern technology, which goes into artificial intelligence and the rest of the computer business. So there is a lot that is going on behind the scenes, and there's a lot of selfish interest involved.
Okay.
One is Zelensky's selfish interest, the other is America's selfish interest. More than that, there is also the elections coming up in America.
Yes.
Biden has already been criticized for the mess he made in Afghanistan. He's also been criticized for the wrong decisions he's making in Hamas-Israel issue. If something goes to the disadvantage of Zelensky and America combined, then his election, re-election, which is already in doubt, he can give it a goodbye.
Okay, and
So-
perhaps Geeta can tell us more as she joins us from ground zero on what world leaders are thinking. They're thinking about their own re-elections. They're thinking about what's happening in the European Union elections, and that is where Georgia Meloni is on a high. Geeta, like Prime Minister Narendra Modi, on a high after elections in India, and those bilaterals are extremely important. Geeta, we need to slip into a quick break, but don't go away. Geeta, when we come back, we'll talk about the India-Italy bilateral and all eyes on that bilateral, because that cooperation is quite in an overdrive. Intense exchanges have taken place in the last 1 year. Much more on that on the other side of a quick break. Stay with us.
Motorola Edge 50 Ultra with Moto AI.
विक्रम आ तो गए, जाओगे कैसे?
बड़े आराम से।
देखिए ये देश
हेलो, मैं आ रहा हूँ। और हाँ, भगा कर ले जाऊंगा। सिक्योरिटी! भैया, भाग गए, पकड़ो उनको। हेलो, बोला था ना, भगा कर ले जाऊंगा। विक्रम!
एक हिंट तो देते?
हिंट?
बड़े आराम से।
At the India Today Media Institute, we believe in training students in independent and critical thinking to improve their ability to analyze the world around them. The training provided at the ITMI is rigorous and multimedia, with a view of producing top-notch media professionals.
सीटों में हमको कितनी सीटें दी गई? 4, और 4 में जो है 2 सीट जो है वो तो जो शिरूर जो है वो शिंदे साहब का आदमी उधर आके, तो हमारे पहले में आए 2 सीट, एक रायगढ़, दूसरी बारामती। एक जगह हम जीत गए, एक जगह हम हार गए। दूसरी बात ये मानता हूँ कि थोड़ी सी जो है पीछे हट हुई है, मगर ये देश में दूसरे राज्यों में भी तो ये हुआ है। जैसे यूपी, कोई भी बोल नहीं रहा था कि ऐसा यूपी में इतने पीछे बीजेपी आएगी, मगर आ गई। तो उसके कारण जो है ये सिर्फ अजीत पवार गट ये है, ये कहना मैं वाजिब नहीं समझता हूँ।
लाखों लाखों वोट मिले हैं, लाखों लाखों, वो किसके वोट है? यहाँ का साउथ अफ्रीका, श्रीलंका, हाँ, ईरान, इराक से लोग आकर यहाँ वोट करते हैं क्या? हमारी जीत स्पष्ट है, निर्णायक है, और इस राज्य के सभी जात धर्म के लोगों ने हमको वोट किया है, चाहे मराठी हो, चाहे मुस्लिम हो, चाहे क्रिश्चियन हो, चाहे पारसी हो, चाहे गुजराती हो, सभी ने हमको वोट किया है।
मेरिट पर भी इसका असर पड़ेगा, जिस तरह से 15 से
हाँ, बिल्कुल पड़ेगा, रैंकिंग पे पड़ेगा। रैंकिंग बिल्कुल री एग्जाम के बाद ही रैंकिंग डिसाइड होगी, क्योंकि काउंसलिंग ये कह रहे हैं कि 6 जुलाई से करेंगे। तो ये कह रहे हैं कि जब 23 जून वाला पेपर हो जाएगा, जल्द से जल्द उसके रिजल्ट निकाल देंगे और उसके बाद फिर से सबकी रैंक शफल होगी, बनेगा। पर हमारा मुद्दा अभी भी ये कि बहुत से बच्चे अपने समय का नुकसान रिपोर्ट नहीं कर पाए। इसके साथ साथ जो पेपर लीक का केस था, उसमें माननीय सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ये कहा कि वो केस बिल्कुल खुला हुआ है, उसकी अगली सुनवाई होगी। और आज माननीय सुप्रीम कोर्ट में जजेस ने पहली बार ये भी बोला कि मान लेते हैं काउंसलिंग हो गई, मान लेते हैं बच्चों का एडमिशन हो गया, उसके बाद भी हमें गैप्स मिलते हैं, तो सुप्रीम कोर्ट हैज ऑल द पावर्स टू रिवर्ट एवरीथिंग। तो उन्होंने कहा मान लेते काउंसलिंग होती है, बच्चों का एडमिशन हो गया, कल को हमें कोई मुद्दा मिलता है, भले ही पेपर लीक हो या कोई और डिस्पेंसी हो, तो हमारे पास सारी पावर इन चीज़ों को वापस सही करने की।
Welcome back. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Italy along with leaders of the biggest economies of the world to discuss the most pressing issues that the world faces. India is not a member of the G7, but Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been invited to this event by his Italian counterpart, Giorgia Meloni. The suave and sophisticated Italian Prime Minister has already won the internet with her Namaste gesture. The internet, of course, abuzz with the melody hashtag Jodi Meet. We get you more in this report.
The eyes of the world are locked on the scenic seaside town of Fasano for the G7 summit, with many checking social media for the first pictures of the Jab They Met moment between Modi and Meloni. Be it the COP28 or last year's G20, the melody Jodi is always a delight. Their camaraderie first broke the internet when Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni posted a selfie with Prime Minister Modi with the hashtag Melody at COP28 in Dubai. The Melody images have been trending on social media since, and meme makers have a field day when both make an appearance together. Their laughter-filled exchanges have always made headlines. The Modi-Meloni friendship really hit the ground when the Italian Prime Minister was invited as the chief guest at the inaugural session of the 8th Raisina Dialogue. Excitement is high ahead of Prime Minister Modi and Meloni's meeting at the G7 summit. Giorgia Meloni's Namaste gesture has already gone viral ahead of the leaders' meet. Even though India is not a member of the G7, Prime Minister Modi has been invited by his Italian counterpart to mark his presence at the summit. This is going to be Prime Minister Modi's first foreign trip after swearing in for his third consecutive term as Prime Minister. Meloni was the first European leader to congratulate Prime Minister Modi after his win. As the world awaits Melody reunion at G7, both leaders have also been working to boost strategic and diplomatic ties. Bureau Report, India Today.
And I want to take you straight to Apulia and get you these live images that are coming in off the G7 summit. All the world leaders together on the world stage. Will there be major takeaways that will be announced? You can see the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak here in these images. We are also standing by because in some time from now, there will be the India-Italy bilateral. Exchanges have been intense between India and Italy in the past 1 year. Prime Minister of Italy had come to India on a state visit in March 2023. Italy is a strategic partner of India. She was also the chief guest at the Raisina dialogue, and then she returned for the G20 summit. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz there. Just a short while back, the world leaders got together and celebrated his birthday. Ambassador Dogra, as we wait for the India-Italy bilateral and perhaps for the photo op here, how does this relationship, how will it be taken forward? India and Italy are also partners in several global initiatives like the Solar Alliance and Coalition for Disaster-Resistant Infrastructure and the very crucial India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor.
Well, exactly. I'm glad, Gaurav, you pointed out the more than bilateral dimension to a relationship. And that is how it is in the world of today, that you're not restricted only to India and another country, but India, another country, plus the surrounding sounds. And in this case, it is India with South Asia and Italy with the part of Europe that it is closely linked with. And in this case, it is the European Union. So Italy has a voice there, an increasingly important voice, because over the last 1 year, the Italian Prime Minister, she has risen in stature, she has risen in the sense of her responsibilities and her decisions, whether on Ukraine or others, migrant issues and so on, have been reasonably balanced, though her party leans to the far right.
Yes.
So India-Italy relationship is not just that between two countries, but that which transcends and goes beyond purely bilateral. The second thing is, and people don't often realize, that Italy is also the house of modern technology and cutting-edge technology, both in terms of defense equipment and also in terms of others. For example, all the best racing cars in the world are manufactured in Italy. Just to give you one example.
Yes.
The best fashion in textile and leather is done in Italy. So there is an immense scope for the two countries. And likewise, India can offer a lot to Italy.
And if I could for a moment describe these images on a television screen, all the world leaders have come together for the photo op. You can see the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau there, Ursula von der Leyen. Also seen in these images, the European Union chief Olaf Scholz, seen in that image, the German Chancellor. And as that camera moves to the center, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Fumio Kishida, also seen in those images. And of course, you see the back of the US President Joe Biden there. Ambassador Sikri, India is a strategic partner of all the G7 countries, great relationship with all, perhaps barring Canada.
Yes, we do have a very important relationship with the EU, and I think that the G7 as a whole, we have excellent relations with all of them, as you said, barring Canada. With the EU, with the countries like France, we have a Horizon 2047 program. So to match with our Amrit Kal, we have a program with France right up to 2047. With Italy itself, I think one of our most important future relationships in the EU is going to be with Italy. They are a very strong anchor in the European Union, and today we have seen that in the European legislative elections there has been a movement to the far right, which of course is exactly where Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is in Italy. So she is going to have an even more important role to play, I think, in the EU. We need to work out the FTA with the EU, which is very important for us. We need to focus on that. We need trade and technology agreement with the EU. So I think with these countries, it is important for us that the G7 taking place in the EU itself is giving us this unique opportunity to talk to the leaders and further our relationships with the EU. But of course, there will be bilateral meetings. There's talk of a bilateral meeting with President Biden as well. We don't know about that yet. But there is meetings with other leaders, other participants from the global south who are there, like Brazil and other countries,
yes.
Who are there. There will be meetings with them. So obviously, this is a very valuable opportunity. But Italy is a very important country in the EU for us, and I'm very glad that at this meeting where Italy is chairing it, India is there in full force, and the rapport between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is so evident and so visible and so important for the future of India's relationship with Italy and the EU.
As all the world leaders get on stage for that photo op, we see Prime Minister Narendra Modi in a traditional Indian attire right at the center. Ambassador Dogra, how would world leaders who are going into election at this stage, Rishi Sunak on one side, popularity rating, and there was this image on social media that talked about the plummeting popularity ratings of a number of leaders. The only two on a high appear to be Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Ambassador Dogra.
Exactly. In fact, I wonder how they are able to stay on for 3 days away from elections in their own country. For example, recently there was the anniversary celebration in France of the Second World War and the Allied victory in it. At a very critical juncture, when just the height of that ceremony was taking place, Rishi Sunak excused himself, just disappeared because he had to give an interview to Sky Television, which he thought was important for him in terms of elections, but which sort of became a bit of a scandal against him. So I wonder how they are giving their full attention and, more importantly, the full authority of their government to the summit's decisions, because they cannot, in all honesty, take decisions which their successors might not be agreeing with. And in a lot of cases, for example, Labour in UK and the far right in France, they will certainly not agree with the kind of policies that Sunak and Macron are following.
Yes.
And as far as Biden is concerned, the general impression is one doesn't know whose hand he's shaking and whether he really is in charge of the policies that are being made in his name.
So when this G7, document comes out, Ambassador Sikri, when you look at these images, these are world leaders of the strongest 7 economies in the world. Do they have something to offer to each other and to the world at large? Or since they're going into elections, they're all in a tough position themselves?
Oh, yes, very much. I think apart from the electoral uncertainties that they are facing, which is, of course, a matter of great concern for them, and they do really envy Prime Minister Modi's popularity ratings in India and the fact that he's come to an unprecedented third term with the NDA party this time is a matter of great, strength to him, and they have greatly respected him for that. But I think that more than that, the economic uncertainties is what is going to be a matter of great concern for the countries of the EU. One is this whole petrodollars issue. The other is the outcome of these two vicious wars that are going on in the world. One between the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the other, the Hamas-Israel conflict.
Yes.
And in both of them, we do know that this is affecting their economies. It's affecting the whole world peace. I mean, people are asking more and more, are we already in World War III? It's really a very disturbing situation, and one hopes that these countries together will be able to come up with some response. We know, for example, that President Putin in St. Petersburg has given a very major peace proposal to the world on the conflict with Ukraine. But President Zelensky at the G7 summit is, brushing it aside, saying you cannot trust him. He hasn't really responded on those things that President Putin has raised. But really speaking, an issue like this, a meeting like G7 taking place right now with all the other leaders there in the outreach summit, that should be an occasion to discuss what President Putin has said.
Ambassador, give me a moment as I bring in our Foreign Affairs Editor Geeta Mohan, who's joined us from Apulia, as we look at these images of Pope Francis having arrived flanked by Giorgia Meloni and the President of Turkey. He's talking to the President of Turkey, Erdogan, just now. Geeta, what's the big takeaway? We're looking at that big photo op, but what's the big takeaway?
Well, the big takeaway is how the global south has represented itself. Look at the number of countries, Gaurav. It has only increased in number every year. And now we're looking at close to a dozen of the developing nations being part of G7. unheard of. Earlier it used to be just 3, 4, 5, and now close to a dozen. So clearly, there is a growing importance. And in that also, look at the countries who have been called. Most of them very important countries on the way to becoming